Christian apologists, of course, do put up all sorts of so-called proofs or demonstrations of the existence of God. There's a whole lot of them. A lot of them have fancy names. You'll have heard these names: the ontological argument, the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, the moral argument, the transcendental argument, the argument from personal experience, the argument from the biblical record, and there are doubtless others. There are all these arguments, 6 or 8 common ones, maybe more minor ones. Christian apologists, such as the great Christian debater William Lane Craig, will come along to debates like this and wheel these arguments out. They can be made to sound plausible, but I'll tell you one thing about all those arguments. They're all bad arguments. Not one has ever stood up to philosophical scrutiny over the centuries in which people have been trying to put them forward. And not only that, when you're confronted with 6 or 8 or however many it is bad arguments, they do not add up to one good argument. 6 or 8 bad arguments will never add up to one good argument. When you see people over the centuries trying to refine arguments, trying to come up with more and more intellectually complex versions of those arguments, putting them in more and more convoluted forms and failing, always finding themselves subject to devastating criticisms, often by Christian philosophers, what you are seeing here is not one good argument that this is adding up to. What you are seeing is a kind of desperate faith that, there must be a good argument around here somewhere if I just keep trying, but there's not. Or you're seeing sheer stubbornness or desperation. These arguments do not add up. I don't have time to go through all those arguments, but I'll give you a sample. I'll just go through a couple of them very, very quickly. And maybe Michael will rely upon some of these arguments. Maybe he'll develop some of them and we can come back to them. But, if he does develop any of these arguments, I want you to look at them pretty carefully as he's speaking, and I will do likewise. Let's just think about the ontological argument, very, very popular, famous argument, which basically says that God exists by definition. You put up some kind of definition of God, say, look, get this concept of God in your mind, and then it turns out that when you examine that concept, that somehow the concept includes God's existence. So God exists, right? This seems a pretty crazy idea that you can kind of define God into existence, but that argument has been put over hundreds of years, since medieval times, and versions are still taught. And they still get picked apart. It can never work. Let me tell you just quickly why it can never work, why it always gets picked apart. Imagine the concept of a pink dragon currently sipping absinthe in the Vice-Chancellor's office. Get that concept in your mind. Any fans here of pink dragons? It's not necessarily an invisible pink dragon, it's just a pink dragon sipping absinthe in the Vice-Chancellor's office. I put it to you that being does not exist. Let me now put another concept in. I hope not. Maybe Macquarie University is a very bizarre place. Maybe some of you have actually seen that dragon. I suspect, however, that dragon does not. If you want to check, go and check after the debate. Don't worry about it too much now. Let me put this concept in your mind. The existent pink dragon sipping absinthe in the Vice-Chancellor's office. You now have that concept in your mind. It's the existing pink dragon sipping absinthe in the Vice-Chancellor's office. The concept includes the existence of this dragon, right? So it exists by definition. But I'm here to tell you, nonetheless, that there is still no pink dragon sipping absinthe in the VC's office. Go and have a look after the debate if you don't believe me. I am pretty confident that this being does not exist. The point is, yes, you can say my concept is such that existence is included in the concept. But that won't mean that the concept is something that is actually instantiated in the real world. There are no pink dragons. The ontological argument is always going to run into that problem, that existence is not just another property that you can tack on in that way. There's always a separate question as to whether the thing that you have as a concept in your mind, whether there's an actual instance of that thing, in the house of reality, not the house of fantasy. So that argument will always fail. The cosmological argument always fails. I'm only going to go through 2 of them. I'll take the cosmological argument. The very crude version of that argument says, look, everything that exists has a cause. The universe itself is something that exists, must have a cause, and that must be God, right? I've just proved the existence of God. Clearly nonsense. If everything that exists has to have a cause like that, God himself has to, but that is not the concept of God. The concept of God, though I say, is not really necessarily coherent. At the very least, it's not the concept of something that itself had to have a cause. So the argument breaks down. There are much more sophisticated versions of that argument, of course. Often you'll hear it put like this: everything that came into existence has to have a cause. The universe came into existence 13.7 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang. Give or take 0.11 billion years or something. Therefore, the universe has to have a cause. That cause is something that itself did not come into existence, therefore God. Right? You can see that it's a bit contrived here, because we know that the naive version of this makes no sense at all. It quickly breaks down. So people come up with this more contrived version of the argument. And people have been doing this for hundreds of years, trying to come up with more contrived versions of the argument to make it work, and it never does. Look, you cannot have that premise, everything that comes into existence has a cause, if by everything you include the universe itself. You don't know that. The causal order itself within which the causal order that we know, the causal order of us and cats and dogs and trees and tables and chairs, that causal order itself may be part of some larger causal order, or it may not. We don't know that. You can't start off with a premise that says, yeah, even that is part of a larger causal order. You just can't do that. But what if you could? What if we waive that point and say, yes, we now admit that the universe itself is part of some larger causal order? Once you get to that point, you haven't established the existence of God. What you've established is that there's some larger causal order beyond our universe, and we know nothing about it. It is very difficult for us ever to know something about it. Physicists may be able to find backdoor ways of testing their theories about it, because there are theories about it. But you can see it's going to be very hard to know much at all about that larger causal order if it exists. It's going to be very hard to test the theories put up by physicists, and we just don't know. We have no reason to think that it's something that is personal, providential, or powerful, benevolent. We have no reason to think that it's an intelligent agent like God. We are nowhere near to establishing that. Look, if somebody comes along and they sell you this ontological argument, this is one about the pink dragon, if they also offer you a good price on the Sydney Harbour Bridge after you've accepted the argument, please be very careful. If someone comes along to you offering you a design for a perpetual motion machine, you can be confident before you even look at that design, no matter how complicated and impressive it is, that it will not work. I say to you, you can be just as confident that no cosmological argument is going to work to demonstrate the existence of God. There are fundamental flaws in these sorts of arguments. And that applies to all of the sorts of arguments that you will hear from the William Lane Craigs and other Christian apologists. All of these arguments have such fundamental flaws that they will never be made to work, and it's not surprising that over hundreds of years philosophers and theologians have not been able to make these arguments work. Again, I put it to you that what we are seeing here is something like desperation, or a view, there must be an argument out here somewhere, a kind of stubbornness, but it's not a sign that these arguments are ever going to add up to a good argument. 2 minutes?
30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I thought I got 2 minutes. That's what I was told. Yes. Okay. I was supposed to get a 2-minute warning, but apparently I'm supposed to wrap up. So at this point, I'll say to you, the main Christian doctrines do not add up, they do not make sense. The main proofs that have been put forward do not add up, they do not make sense. They do not certainly add up to a lot of bad proofs coming to one good proof. What we are seeing is a sign of desperation. We are seeing a situation where people believe in this being for non-rational reasons such as socialisation, parental teaching, or sheer cultural familiarity, and then having believed in this thing for non-rational reasons, they look around for rationalisations. God is not the answer to genuine questions that you might have. God is an answer. It's something that people already believe, looking for the right question, and the right question is never found. That's the situation that you find yourself in. You do not have a reason to justify your views to a rational outsider, and so much so that it's time that you really left God behind.